order the September 18th, 2023 regular meeting of the Tonganoxie City Council. Ms. Huntington, will you note that I am present and call the roll, please?
Yes, Mayor. Mr. Partridge?
Here.
Ms. McCutcheon?
Here.
Ms. Stevens is absent. Mr. Donnelly?
Here.
Mr. Dale?
Here.
Would you join us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thanks, everyone. Item 2 on our agenda is the approval of minutes, where we review the minutes from the previous meeting from September 5th, 2023. Are there any notes for the minutes or questions or concerns? Seeing none, I'd accept a motion to approve.
Motion to approve is presented.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Ms. McCutcheon. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Item 3 on our agenda is the consent agenda, where we review the bill payments from the previous period. Are there any questions, concerns, or conversation about the bill payments? If not, I would accept a motion to approve.
I'll motion to approve.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Partridge. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Under old business, we have nothing except it is the normal time when someone from the public can talk to the governing body about a topic that may or may not be on the agenda. Mr. Porter, did anyone sign up?
No sign-ups, Mayor.
All right, thank you. Then we'll go on to new business. Item A is 2022 Audit Report and Financial Statements presentation by Karen Lynn, Audit Director of BT and Company, PA. Mr. Brakovich.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'd like to introduce Karen Lynn. She is with BT and Co. They've been our audit firm, I believe, the last 3 years by contract, and I think they actually finished out 1 year where our then contractee wasn't able to complete the report. And so Karen and her staff have great familiarity with the city. Mr. Porter serves as the city's primary point of contact in terms of providing documents that are requested during the audit process. I think Dan wouldn't mind if I shared. I believe from city staff we have a great respect for the professionalism that BT and Co. staff conduct the audit. We think they're fair. They do ask a lot of questions and really dig into the detailed information, but I think it's to the benefit of the city and certainly to their credit in their profession. And so with that, hopefully I've buttered Karen up enough that she'll give us a great report. But there should be a copy of it at the dais, I believe, for everyone. And then certainly when Karen's done, if you have any questions for staff, either Mr. Porter or I would be happy to try to provide those answers. So Karen, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.
I appreciate a few moments of your meeting this evening to talk about the results of the audit. You should have 2 documents. One is titled the Report to the City Council. The other is the financial statement. Most of my comments will come from the report to the City Council because that document has the results of the audit and those other items that are important for you to hear from me as the auditor about the audit and the results of the audit. So starting in that document, just past the table of contents is where I will start if you'd like to follow along. First, our responsibility after you hire us to perform the audit is to perform the audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards. Those standards require that we plan and perform the audit in order to form an opinion about whether the financial statements are free of material misstatement. And so we design our audit with that objective in mind. We were able to issue an unmodified opinion on the financial statements, which is the highest form of opinion that can be given to a set of financials. These financials are prepared in accordance with the regulatory basis of accounting, which is a basis that is promulgated by the Kansas, the state of Kansas in their Kansas Municipal Audit and Accounting Guide, which allows any municipality within the state of Kansas to waive setting their financials in accordance with GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, and instead to prepare them in accordance with the regulatory basis, which is basically the cash basis. We do certain things as a part of the audit process, in addition to looking at the financial statements and documents associated with those. And what I'd like to do is to move over to the financial statements, to the opinion, which is in front of the financial statements and disclosures. That is actually on page 2, if you wanted to jump over there with me. In the opinion, which is where we state our unmodified opinion, there's a set of bulleted points. These bulleted points really kind of highlight some things that we do as a part of the audit process, which I think are important for you as the governing body to hear and understand about things that we do in the audit process. And so I'd like to just kind of read through those to highlight them for you. In performing an audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, we exercise professional judgment and maintain professional skepticism throughout the audit. We identify and assess the risks of material misstatement of the financial statement, whether due to fraud or error, and we design and perform our audit procedures that are responsive to those risks. We obtain an understanding of internal control relevant to the audit in order to design our audit procedures that are appropriate in the circumstances. We evaluate the appropriateness of accounting policies used and the reasonableness of significant accounting estimates made by management, as well as evaluate the overall presentation of the financial statements. And we conclude whether in our judgment there are any conditions or events that would raise any doubt about whether the city can continue to exist for a reasonable period of time that we would consider to be generally 1 year. So all of those things are part of our audit process, our planning process, and are things that we've always done as a part of the audit, but are now really highlighted and pointed out in these bulleted points, and I think are important for you as the governing body to understand about our audit process. If there were any items in any of these areas that we had concerns or issues or problems with, we would be bringing them to your attention and letting you know about those. Any accounting policies that we had issues or problems with consistency or their appropriateness, any estimates or their application, for example, any of those things, we would make sure to bring those to your attention. And there was nothing in any of those areas that we needed to let you know about. We did have a couple of very, very minor adjusting entries that were made. These are on the last page in this report to the City Council that you can take a look at. You can see when you look at them how immaterial they are, but they were items that needed to be made just to make sure that that everything rolled forward appropriately. One of the other things that I want to point out in the opinion is that we did have what we call a modification of opinion paragraph. And this is really just to point out that because of the adoption of the regulatory basis of accounting, we need to have a paragraph in our opinion that states that the financial statements are adverse in relation to generally accepted accounting principles, but they are unmodified in relation to the regulatory basis. So we do have these paragraphs in our opinion that kind of walk through that process or that conclusion. And so in this report to the board, we also state that so that it's highlighted for your information here. It's really, it's not highlighting it, it's not indicating that there's an issue or problem with that, but it's just that generally accepted accounting principles are those that are standard. And so since Kansas has adopted this, something that's not standard to generally accepted accounting principles, it's something that we just highlight to make sure that readers are aware of that. the next section called Observations about the Audit Process. There's really anything in this area, if there would be any issues or problems that occurred during the audit process, if we had any disagreements about accounting matters, disagreements about auditing matters, anything that would fit into that category would be things that we would have brought to your attention much earlier than tonight if we had any issues like that. Things like that could be red flags of more serious issues, and so we would have made sure that you would be aware of those at the point in time they had come to our attention if we had anything of that nature. We did not have anything like that, so nothing needed to be brought to your attention. We did have great cooperation. Things were ready and prepared for us when we came in to do the audit. We did most of it remotely, but when we were doing the audit, everything was ready for us. We had a very efficient audit process, and we do want to thank you for that process being very efficient. It really helps us to be able to keep on our schedule and keep on track, and so we do really appreciate that. So thank you for all the work that you did in preparing for that. We always do like to point out that the good results like this, which, no findings and having the unmodified opinion, doesn't just happen in the weeks, just a couple of weeks before the audit and during the audit, but it's a year-round process of good financial reporting control structure, internal control structures that can have this kind of results. So I think that's what you can take away, is that the control structures are working year-round in order to have this kind of a result. So thank you for that. The last item that I want to point out is the letter that is on the city's letterhead. The items that are listed here in this letter, and there's quite a few, are items that we discussed during the audit process related to financial statements, related to accounting policies. These items, I think, are important for you as a governing body to read through and understand as you read through the financial statements, and we encourage you to read through the letter. This is the last step prior to finalizing the audit report and the financial statements. Once this letter is signed, that is the sign to us as the audit firm that the financial statements are ready to be finalized, and the date that the letter is signed then becomes the date of our audit opinion. So this letter is good information for you as a governing body to help you with your fiduciary responsibilities, so we do encourage you to read through that. So with that, good conclusions with the unmodified opinion. There were no findings to report, and I would open for any questions that you have about the audit process.
Well, thank you for all the hard work you've put into this. We appreciate it a great deal. Council, do you have any questions or comments?
Does the city keep a statement of financial position or net position, or in other words, a balance sheet? Because I don't see it in here. Do you present one? Do you ever report one, or like a balance sheet would be more of like a non-governmental type word, but a statement of financial position, something that lists the assets, liabilities, and net assets of the city. Most of what I see is activity, like a statement of, receipts and expenditures, but you know what I'm saying?
I think that the waiver to not report under generally accepted accounting principles really, I think, relieves the city from doing that.
Do you guys keep it? I mean, I'm just curious how you would keep it internally, how you keep track of everything with, you must have a system to do that, right? I mean, obviously, you know how much cash you have, for example. Well, how do you keep track of the stuff that doesn't go on this report?
As in property and
As in all the assets that the city has?
probably a combination on the financial side. Some of the monthly financial reports and the quarterly treasurer's reports are good indications of our debt liabilities outstanding on that quarterly basis, as well as our cash position in each fund. In terms of property, the city's property schedule with our property and liability insurance provider is something we update regularly and keep record of. We don't depreciate on that schedule or calculate that depreciation like we would under GAAP basis accounting, but we do keep it current in terms of replacement cost value, and it boils down to a pretty granular level of components inside buildings, equipment at the water and wastewater plants, but
the reason I asked was I saw in here, I can't remember which note it was. I think it's the one about liability for absences, which I know it mentioned you don't keep record a liability for unused sick time. But do we record the liability for vacation time? The unused vacation time of approximately 169,000. Do we record a liability for that?
we don't record it in our financials. We report it annually to our auditors. That's something that's requested each year, but
Okay.
it's not something that is shown in that balance sheet.
Okay.
The debt is on a schedule in the audit report on page 10. And the KMAG requires that the only things that are on that schedule are things that have set future payments.
Right.
So the compensated absences don't show up on that schedule because they don't have future schedule.
Matt, it's a little hard to get used to. Being an old banker, I sure like to see financial statements and disclosures and all that type of stuff. We just don't do it and haven't done it. And the GAAP accounting for accrued sick pay and accrued vacation times, well, it would apply at a regular business. It doesn't apply here. We just don't follow GAAP. So it'd be nice to see a list of all of the city's assets somewhere, just for ease.
Well, that's my
Dan knows
question.
where it's all
I
at.
know we don't report it, but I was just curious. We have to track it internally somehow, yes?
I would say yes, but in various, there isn't a master list, I would say.
So when you dispose of something, like, surely you have to, there has to be a process of making sure that an asset gets off of the books at some point.
Mhm.
But I don't know. All right. It's not that big a deal. I was more curious than anything. And I really do appreciate your efforts. I understand the position that is, and it's, and also it seemed like you guys were here not that long ago. So to get a report turned around that fast is not always easy. So I appreciate that as well. So thank you.
And just for process, once a year, the council does pass a resolution adopting the gap waiver, which usually happens, I think, in July. Is that right? Right after.
Yeah. Well, that's
Or maybe it's
required by
January. It's
statute
probably
anyways for
January.
us to depart from
To
GAAP.
choose to
We have
opt out.
to
Yeah.
pass that.
All right, thanks.
And GAAP would be pretty expensive to manage too.
Time-consuming to manage and right, expensive.
Are there any questions, any other questions or comments?
Pretty
Okay,
good report. Good job, guys.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
I
much.
would like to reserve the right to look through it, because there's lots of information. Most of it we've already seen a lot of, but I'd like to look at it in case something comes up for next meeting.
Pass along any questions that anyone has.
Great, all right.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Karen.
Thank you.
Have a great evening.
Okay, moving to item B, Resolution 09-2302, accepting priorities for progress Regional Transportation Capital Improvements Plan. Mr. Brakovich.
Yes, thanks again, Mayor. This item is probably something you remember. I believe it was about a month or a little over a month ago when we had the consultants that were hired by the county to complete the regional transportation plan. And essentially what the focus of that whole study was to determine a process by which the county could prioritize various transportation-related projects that have been identified in the county and correlated to certain funding structures, whether they be federal or state or local, and how those funding opportunities could match or help the county prioritize matching certain projects that had a higher probability of, let's say, winning certain funding opportunities. And so the consultant came here, made a presentation on the findings of that year-long or even longer study. Staff asked, and let me back up. Ultimately, what the county is asking for, and Bill Knoll is kind of spearheading this, is that every participating community, so that's the county, the city of Tonganoxie, Basur, Lansing, Leavenworth, Mid-America Regional Council, KDOT, that we collectively adopt a resolution that says we've all worked together on this and we're all approving the findings of the study or the study itself. And so, again, because we were all funding partners in that. And so staff had asked you, and you agreed as an elected body to withhold adopting that resolution until we let the other communities hear the presentation and essentially see if there were any issues. I think most communities had comments just about, how things were prioritized, some lofty, multi-million-dollar bridges were identified in there. I think the questions you had for the consultant at the time, seemingly not a lot of things in the southern part of the county were top priorities. There were a few projects identified. I think if we looked at it as a corridor, some of the discussion was how to connect back into the DeSoto area or opportunities arising from the Panasonic project. I know the counties recently touted that Bill Knoll was successful in receiving some state grants to improve a couple of bridges that are in the southern part of the county, Linwood to DeSoto or Leavenworth to Johnson County connections down in that area. So having said that, in my communication with the other city managers, most of the cities have, or at least I think all of them at this point, have had a chance to consider it and adopt the resolution. Again, with comments from their communities that were similar to the feedback that this board provided to the council at the time. So we're back at this point where we would ask you to consider also adopting the resolution that says we participated and we understand the findings of the study. And ultimately, I believe it's the matrix that would serve to help the county evaluate projects and I guess ultimately give the county the ability to say this is the top priority project in the county based on the criteria we all collectively agreed to, and hopefully avoid ill feelings or feelings that projects were denied or not prioritized in certain areas. I'd be happy to answer any other questions you might have.
Council, do you have any questions for Mr. Brakovich? Seeing none, is there a motion to move this forward? Or motion to approve, I apologize.
I'll move to approve the resolution number 092302. Resolution accepting the progress for priorities, regional transportation capital improvements plan conducted jointly by the Board of County Commissioners of Leavenworth County, Kansas, and the cities of Basur, Lansing, Leavenworth, and Tonganoxie, Kansas.
Thank you, Mr. Partridge. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Is there any further conversation about this?
Mayor, I just throw one other thing. When I mentioned all the partners, I failed to include the Leavenworth County Port Authority, and they were definitely a funding partner and at the table for this. So I didn't want to leave them out.
Thanks for the clarification. I guess we'll vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Moving on to item C, Resolution 092303, contract for 4th Street Bridge Replacement Project Engineering and Preliminary Services with BG Consultants Incorporated. Mr. Porter.
Thank you, Mayor. This item should sound familiar because it's an item that has been the subject of a lot of focus in our development of the 2024 budget. This is one of our top priorities in the city's capital maintenance and improvement plan and was included for full funding allocation in the 2024 annual budget from the city's capital projects fund. In looking ahead in the materials on page 32 out of 59 in the agenda packet, there's a brief schedule, an engineer's opinion of probable construction schedule. And I want to point out that as the reason that this is being brought forward for your consideration tonight. If we issue a notice to proceed later this week, the estimated schedule, completing design and authorizing to go out for bids is anticipated to last from now until mid-June 2024. So that would be the design phase of this project. The services that would be done in that phase of the project include the work and the contract with BG Consultants that's before you, which is to include preliminary design, preparation of plans, and preparation of materials to go out for bid. The one other contracted service that the city would be requested to approve would be approval of bids for geotechnical services. BG Consultants wouldn't provide that. It would be a third party. One element of the contract that you see before you tonight that was edited before the meeting tonight was inclusion of a requirement that we follow our procurement policy and attempt to solicit at least 3 viable bids for the council to consider, as opposed to coming back with 1 or 2 bids, which was the standard BG template for other communities to consider for a similar contract. The other part of the schedule that I want to point out for your attention is if construction was authorized in basically mid-August next summer following consideration of the bids in mid to late July. Beginning of construction would start in the winter season when flows in the stream are the lowest and based on contractor availability to some extent. So November 15th was the estimated construction start date of next year and completion estimated May 15th of 2025. So again, the reason that we're not waiting until this spring or January to come before you for this contract is essentially that could add a year or close to a year to that time frame for this overall project to be completed. When we look also at this project, an updated EOPC is included in the council packet as well. It does not differ from a preliminary EOPC that we last reviewed in the budget discussions in July and August of this summer. There is contingency built into that, and that is an all-in cost inclusive of design and construction subtotals for the project. Staff have reviewed the contract and the project documents, the schedule, and compared it to the Church Street Bridge project that we just recently completed. This project promises to be a little bit longer in construction timeline. The Church Street Bridge kicked off in late December and was done by sort of end of April timeframe, but that was a little bit of a smaller project with a little bit less expanse to the bridge span, and it had a little bit different scenario in terms of where we could work in that project. Do you have anything to add, George?
I think so.
The not-to-exceed amount for the design and bid letting support services contract for your consideration tonight is $95,500. And like I said, the only other cost we anticipate coming back before you is geotechnical services with a third-party firm that would probably be something we could contemplate the second meeting in October 16th, if those bids are ready by that date. But happy to take any questions you might have. In terms of the budget adjustments for this year, we may advance October 16th a slight budget adjustment to the Capital Projects Fund to allow for the costs we expect to incur on this design element before the end of the fiscal year in December of this year. But happy to take any questions you have.
Council, do you have any questions?
The plan to notify the public well in advance of when we're going to close that bridge. So obviously Wally was here last week or 2 weeks ago wanting to make sure on his bicycle, and other people use it a lot. So we really need to plan that out to note. Of course, you can notify a million different times and somebody's going to come in and say, well, I never saw it.
Yeah.
But what is do we have a plan to notify public of the date of closure? Then, for instance, up on Fairmount, is it Fairmount Road that's been closed forever with the bridge? And
Yeah.
I thought it was supposed to be done 2 months ago, and it's still not. So that type of thing I'd like to avoid if we can, so they know when we're gonna not let them use it to when they can get back on it. And obviously, construction timeline is relative to weather and performance and other things, but.
Yeah.
What, have we got through that yet from public notification well in advance?
We haven't finalized the plans for this project. It is a higher traffic count area than Church Street was. Some of the steps I think we learned from with Church Street was starting early with the school district to let their transportation group know, especially for bus routes and other considerations, and they can plan that in advance with their staff. We also have improved what we put on the city's website and Facebook page and plan that out at least a week or more in advance of the actual closure date. So there's some time-stamped communication basically that goes out. But I think we could probably add to that for a high-profile area like this, Tonganoxie mirror advertisement, signage. We've done very affordable vinyl signs for Tonganoxie days and the mayor's tree lighting, and those are just a couple $100 and can, put a large display up that gives people some idea too of what's paying for the bridge, that it's a city project and it's the county's tax dollars that are the city's share of the county sales tax that goes to fund bridge projects like that. And I think that's important also to illustrate to the public.
It's a busy street, and a lot of people will be using it. Maybe a Goodyear blimp or something for a couple months.
You don't
Somebody's
know,
gonna say I didn't know it, and you
Yeah.
know that's gonna happen.
And I think that's important, Mr. Donnelly. It's a good point. It's not like our typical, like, hey, we're doing curb and gutter in your neighborhood, or we're repaving your street, don't park. But certainly there's an aspect of that we expect from the ultimate contractor on the job to also communicate. But we'll try to get out as far in front and as we can with not only the residents, but the businesses that are located along 4th Street, and ensuring that they can notify delivery services or anybody they're interacting with. And it will be an inconvenience, as construction projects always are, but we hope that the reminder that it'll be an improved bridge with improved pedestrian access, and the community won't have to worry about this bridge for the next 30 years. Hopefully there will be some solace in those facts. So, but we will certainly highlight that as we move through an RFP process and select a contractor, that's communication isn't just solely on the city, but we're not going to shirk those responsibilities either. So
The last question would be just, do we expect that traffic has to move from that street to another street? Do we expect any traffic flow through neighborhoods that, I can't see it being too bad, but is there any anticipation of extra traffic flow through Village or whatever's up there, one of those? Because one of those streets is really crowded with cars parked on the street.
yeah, I think that's part of the analysis we'll end up doing, whether it's with BG acting as the city engineer or with whoever, how do we identify the detours? How will those be marked? I'm certain that we'll have to have something on 206th Street. We'll have to have something on 2440 notifying folks, Main Street. And so, but Mr. Porter touched on a lot of the big things, again, just where the nature of these projects, you have to attack it at low flow, which is in the winter, which is unfortunately the time school's in play. And so, routing school buses and even our own public safety. We have a fire station located on 4th Street, and that's going to impact their routes. And so we're certainly, at least internally, already in the planning phases of what's that going to look like. Trying to stay, we were probably from a staff level as frustrated as the city council was in seemingly how long it just took to get the Church Street project going. And then once it kind of got going, it moved at a pretty good clip and stayed on track. And so we're trying to be sensitive to those issues, and just as I'm sure your comments and questions are tonight, just how far out in front of that can we get with communication?
Well, the George Road debacle with
Yeah.
A16, we sure don't need that.
No, and we will try to avoid that. We don't want a bunch of speeding detourees going through neighborhoods if we can.
Who was the contractor? Forgive me if I'm totally getting my facts wrong. Who was the contractor that was late on the water tower And we withheld some of our payment, was that in my
Caldwell Tank, yes.
Caldwell tank?
Yep.
Okay.
I think we'll do a much better job than our friends to the north.
I think it's the consensus up here, just guessing, that we do want to have a walking bridge component to this bridge. Is that possible to do that before the construction of the bridge itself?
No, I think in the way we've approved this, I believe it's an integrated system, but if you're asking, is there a temporary way to provide a pedestrian crossing? I think we'd really have to talk about the liability associated with that. I mean, we've got the low water crossing that would come from VFW, but unless I misunderstood, what I thought you were asking is there a way to continue to provide pedestrian crossing while this is under construction? And if that's the question, I think the answer is no, we can't at that location.
I just was wondering if we could build the walking bridge first.
Yeah, I don't think when we had a lot of options for what it would look like. I don't think we did an isolated walking bridge. I think this design is actually incorporating the pedestrian crossing as part of the same structure. Yeah. And Dan, unless I missed something on that, but
Right. It has a illustration of an example structure on page 33 of the agenda packet. It shows it's a 30-foot wide roadway with a corral rail and a bicycle rail that separates then an 8-foot pedestrian path from the end of the bridge span, which is the 6-foot chain link fence design right now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so any more questions? If not, I would accept a motion.
I'll make a motion to authorize approval of Resolution 09-23-03, approving the execution of the 4th Street Bridge Replacement Project preliminary engineering design and bid phase services with BG Consultants, Inc. for an amount not to exceed $95,500.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Partridge. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Item D is Resolution 09-2304, authorizing filing of an application with the Kansas Department of Health and Environment for a loan under the Kansas Water Pollution Control Revolving Fund Act as part of the 2023 wastewater treatment plant improvements Phase 1 project. Mr. Porter.
Yeah, Mayor, I might just throw in a few opening comments. Sorry. Again, this is one of our large projects that we've identified and prioritized on the CMIP. It's an expansion of the wastewater treatment plant. Going back 2 years, we've been discussing and planning for this. The project itself will be handled in 2 phases. And phase 1 that will include some components that made sense in terms of purchasing items or equipment that will occur later in phase 2, but from a pricing standpoint, it made more sense to do it now. So for phase 1, it's approximately $5.7 million total project. The council had approved allocating our remaining ARPA funds, which are a little over $750,000, towards the soft cost or design costs associated with this, which left us in an opportunity when we struck out twice with the State Department of Commerce and base grants on what I still think is a very worthy project. Our plan B was to go pursue this program through KDHE's revolving loan funds, where the state offers a program for projects like this related to sewer or wastewater, where they offer you loans that are based on 60% of the going rate, interest rates. And so we are approved for $5 million. It's been kind of earmarked for us, and so we need to take that next formal step that has a deadline of October 16th for formally submitting our application. We're working with Thaniel Monaco from BG. You'll probably recall Thaniel is doing the design work. We're trying to get all that design stuff done so we can actually go out for bid on this project. And probably the last thing I'll throw in before I turn it back over to Mr. Porter is in the communication that we received from KDHE's Bureau of Water contact. You know, what's the going rate for the month of August? And I thought it was a pretty aggressive, nice rate of 2.18%. And so as long as rates stay somewhat steady, we'll try to get that application submitted as quickly as possible. And then just as that program works, we're approved for a certain amount, but we can, I believe, use that as a drawdown effect and just start paying on the debt as we have to ask for those funds to be made available for the project. So likely that all $5 million of this project aren't going to be done at once. And so there is a little sense of relief there that we know the associated debt schedule doesn't go with it. But that is our target, to use the $5 million. The project itself, we know that it's going to be, for both phases of the expansion, likely a little over $10 million. So that kind of gives you an idea of what's waiting on phase two. Phase one is the most critical. We have those 5-year certificates through KDHE that certify our plant. And so phase one will get us the necessary improvements, and KDHE is aware, and they have been, from a regulatory side, not just this funding opportunity, but the regulatory side, monitoring our design work as well. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, but Mr. Porter's also been working closely with Mr. Monaco at BG to get ready for this tonight and hopefully this first step of actually submitting the application itself. Dan?
The only things I might add are a couple points about the program for the Campus Water Pollution Control Revolving Fund. This would be, to my understanding, the first time that the city has taken advantage of that program. I'm not sure if you would recall, Mr. Donnelly.
The revolving fund we have used, but is there a separate?
For utility projects, I wasn't able to find any projects.
We've used a revolving fund before. It's been a while.
Probably predates our current sewer plant at least, because that was financed up in a separate practice. But one other thing to point out in the concept of where we are tonight, the item in the resolution prepared for the council's consideration authorizes staff to prepare and submit the city's application for the funds and the agreement. KDHE will then review and analyze our data on our utility system, our number
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Porter. Any questions? If not, I would entertain a motion for Resolution 092304.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we approve resolution number 09-23-04, authorizing the submission of an application to the Kansas Department of Health and Environment for a loan from the Kansas Water Pollution Control Revolving Fund to finance a portion of the cost of the 2023 wastewater treatment plant improvements Phase 1 project.
Well done. Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Ms. McCutcheon. Is all in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes. Item E on the agenda is to consider approval to purchase salt commodity for snow and ice control activities. Mr. Porter?
Thank you, Mayor. This item we always try to do normally when it's 90 to 100 degrees, so we're slacking this year, bringing it forward when fall seems to be around the corner. But each year we do. In recent history, we have attempted to utilize the bidding power of Leavenworth County, which purchases a lot more of this commodity than any one of the smaller local cities within the Leavenworth County. And so they collect bids from various salt commodity providers. Typically, those are located in the Hutchinson area, and as that's the origin of their products. And this year, the county was kind enough to share their bid results with us. And we actually have a new low bid compared to previous years. The low bidder in this year's results was Central Salt, LLC, at a price of $58.74 per ton. Last year, and for several years in a row, the low bidding company was Independent Salt Company. And last year's price was just a little bit more than $1 per ton less than this year. So we did see a slight increase, but nothing too significant for our budget projections. Every year we also utilize the expertise of Kent Heskett to sort of view what we have in stock from prior year activities with winter street treatment. And last year, if you recall, we had a lot of fortunate circumstances when the timing and the amount of winter precipitation fell. We didn't often have to do full treatment of our street network. Every year in more difficult seasons, we can anticipate about 8 to 12 incidents where most of the streets in town require some level of either pre-treatment or post-storm treatment. Last year was much more on the lighter side, and this year when we conducted an emergency repair of our salt barn facility at Public Works, we preserved the viability of the stockpile that we had there under that tarped enclosure. So what Kent's asked for consideration for this year is for 100 tons of the commodity to be ordered. Our high in the last 4 to 5 years has been 250 tons, so we're significantly less than the highest year, but we're also just about 50 tons lower than I would say an average year in terms of what he gauges we need. We also build in about a 10-ton margin for the bid that you all consider not to exceed amount, and that's just because it gets loaded onto dump trucks and the loaders don't really look at the scale and go, oh, you're at 99.8, we're going to call it good. They put in large quantities at once and don't like to unload once they've loaded. So we give that margin. So we're asking for authority tonight to move forward with a cost not to exceed of $6,461.40, which gives us 10 tons leeway from our actual order. But happy to take any questions you have. This is a general fund expenditure, and as it treats the entirety of the city and provides street safety improvements during the winter, and we look forward to getting this on hand and being ready to go this winter.
So you do realize you're jinxing us by ordering less salt.
We know who to blame. Mr. Heskett emailed
Yes.
us exactly how much he wanted. He messed up big time.
Do you have any questions?
Is Central Salt from Hutch too?
I believe all 3 of the vendors on that list
Hell
are.
yes.
Actually, they got 4 bids. 3 bids. They asked for 5, but they got 3. One is called Hutchinson Salt, so how can you not get that?
I wish I could buy a ton of salt for $57 or $58. That sounds nice.
What
We
you
could
do
have
with
a
it?
I would.
Is there a motion to approve?
Oh, I'll make a motion to authorize the purchase of salt supplies in 2023 from Central Salt LLC for a total maximum cost of $6,461.40.
Thank you, Mr. Partridge. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Donnelly. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. Item F and item G sort of go together, is my understanding. So we'll start with Mr. Brekovich.
Yep, thanks, Mayor. So item F is listed as a individual item, but it's an addendum to the monthly financial report that Mr. Porter's gonna go over. And so we'll just, that's the only item on city manager's agenda, so we'll switch to that. Dan?
Thank you. So this item, I'll focus in first on the water park report. Darren Shoup, our water park manager, offered some data to share with us, and then we also compiled some financial information. This is included in the agenda packet on page 9 out of 16 of the financial report. And I'll just highlight a couple things. This section on the water park spans page 9, page 10, and page 11 of the financial report. So in terms of revenue performance overall, for the water park this season, we trended lower in receipts in each of the major categories of revenue: general admissions or total admissions, concessionaire sales, rental receipts, and swimming lessons. And as a whole, those categories totaled 5.2% less revenue in 2023 through our closure date in September, with the Labor Day being the close of season. There is one point of differential, though, to point out in operations. Most years we have about 2 to 2.5 weeks of August, the month of August, that the water park's open 7 days a week, weekends and weekdays. This year, due to our availability of management and staff to fill the required positions for lifeguard, we did have an abbreviated closure for weekdays starting in early August. I think our last day of the season was August 9th this year, and typically we get another full week at least in that regard. I know that's something that Mr. Shoup conveyed that was unfortunate, just because it cuts our season a little bit shorter, but we were still able to staff weekends, including rentals on the weekend evenings, all the way through our normal closure date of Labor Day. When looking also at our revenue projections, we were 3.4% above our budgeted revenue projections in the general fund for pool receipts. 2022 was our highest annual level of revenue collections in at least what we're aware of for the history of the water park. There were probably a few years and seasons when it first opened that we approached these numbers, but 2022, coming out of COVID and our closure in 2020, was our highest performing revenue performance year by a pretty good margin. When you look at expenditure trends for 2023, we were 2.8% ahead of 2022 in expenses between the 4 categories defined as personal services, salaries and benefits, contractual services, commodities, which are largely concession supplies, chemicals, and maintenance and tool supplies to operate the facility, and then capital outlay items, which at the water park and the general fund budget, those are typically orders for lounge chairs or replacement equipment for things that break or need maintenance attention or replacement. I think something that's skewing that number high, salaries and benefits and contractual services were both a little less than 3% down compared to last year, which we were pleased with, and that is reflective of the pool not having the extra about week or week and a half of 7 days a week open status at the end of the season. Capital outlay items had a pretty significant jump, but that was because they are such a small amount of budget in this fund. And commodities had a significant jump of 20% higher, and that is largely due to chemical purchases. When we look at our tracking of chemical sales and prices have gone up tremendously during 2021 and 2023. 2022, there was sort of a leveling off, but then we saw again this year and heard from other water parks that certain supplies of chemicals became even more expensive and sometimes hard to source, as a lot of people now have pools, either personally or water parks have reopened that were closed during 2020 in particular with the COVID pandemic. So when we look at revenues and expenditures on a general level, I don't think we have anything of huge concern to note to the City Council, but it was interesting to see, besides just what you'd expect in admissions and concessions, to see swimming lessons and attendance fees show a slight dip compared to prior year. So if you look at page 2 of the Water Park report, this is some of the data from our historic records in the years that it is available at least. And so the chart on page 10 of 16 of the financial report shows attendance rates per month. So that's attendance for day pass tickets and season pass users. That's basically people through the door. And I think what's really interesting to note, and anecdotally it kind of tracks what we either observed at the park or heard from Mr. Shoup, this year in May and June, we actually outpaced last year in terms of attendance rates for those 2 months. We were slightly below about 500 less patrons in July, but if you look at August and September was a slight uptick to last year, but August in particular, instead of 4,204 visitors in August last year, we were down to only 2,323 visitors this year. Some of that's based on not being open, but I think even on the days we were open in August, the weather conditions or storms coming through right before the pool opened and kind of made the whole day a bit of a dud. We really just hit a lull there that was actually going back to prior years from 2009 to 2014. This year was lower than all of those years individually. So just interesting to note that attendance trend. I mean, it was great to see June and kickoff weekend with the weather we had, and Memorial Day weekend was excellent. But I think what Mr. Shoup attributes some of this to is obviously weather dependent. That's a big player in what we see. I think we also see, and he's reported to us, a prevalence of pools people own and keep at their home or have friends that have personal pool options that don't need to go to a public water park necessarily. And I think we also see that reflected in our swim lessons. So our swim lessons this year had a few vacancies and slots open. Some of that Mr. Shoup attributes to private lessons that he hears from. Prior employees go out and because of their experience teaching lessons with us for the city, they go out and have a network of people that they give private lessons to, or have a pool at home that they choose to do that in that setting instead of with the city. We didn't have huge amounts of open times, but this is probably the first year since, definitely since 2020, the year we were closed, that we had openings in each session of the summer for those 2-week settings of pool swim lesson opportunities. Rental receipts are something that Darren was thought was very promising. When he looked at our comparison to a few other communities' water parks, he thought that our rates, which we changed last in 2021, could still use some adjustment in rentals. He reported that when he gave the fee schedule to people for rentals, he never once actually said he heard a comment that we were overpriced or somewhat expensive, and that while that's a good amenity to offer and give, we don't necessarily have any local preference or kind of advantage given in either pricing or availability of rentals. Someone from Shawnee or Lawrence or any other community can rent our water park and have a gathering there just as easily as a local resident or person that lives a little closer. So that's not necessarily a recommendation from him, but he did want to share that with the city council, that if he assessed our user fee schedule and our charges, the rentals is something that he thinks could see an increase. And especially as we pay the staff more that work at those facilities during the rental period. We need to make sure we're recouping that, or at least coming closer to recouping that cost from those.
Question on that same page on the membership sold, I assume that means the list of season pass memberships.
Yeah.
So we had the highest ever of passes, but still lower revenue.
Yeah.
So we're shifting away people, obviously, we'd have to be shifting away from a day pass to more things that create less revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Is that an accurate statement?
Yes,
I'm just
yeah.
guessing at it.
Yeah, there's ticket books, day pass, and the season passes. And
So
the
we're
season
getting more
passes are
people
high.
using that pass, and it's probably, if you break that down, it's probably more in the family bucket.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really affecting our revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
And I know we changed last season. Our only change to the rate structure was changing from family to group, which I think was well received. It eliminated a lot of that friction with customers, and I would essentially point out like grandparents, cousins, aunts and uncles, the non-family unit groups were able to still come and show one pass and gain admission. One thing that our staff talked about with Mr. Shoup was looking at options for a 3-person pass and a 5-person pass to sort of give smaller family groups that say 2 people or 3 people may not enjoy the financial benefit that a family of 5 or a group of 5, and they can, collaborate with relatives and friends to get a group pass of a higher number. But for those smaller units, an individual pass wasn't very appealing because of the number of times they had to visit to make their money back versus buying daily admission for that.
And stupid question, but one family counts as one of the 345, right?
One group
Okay.
pass, yep. Our collaboration with the Rec Commission for the couple of events, one event that Jennifer Feeney came and asked the council's permission for was a popular event, despite having to change the date due to weather circumstances. They are, though, an outstanding payment. We are working with them to collect the fee agreed upon for that service, and so that's not reflected in the statements yet, but we'll follow up with them later this week to make sure that's cleaned up and added as well. That's our one outstanding receipt we expect still.
Well, speaking of the Rec Commission, could we have a conversation with them perhaps to discuss maybe they take over management of the pool? I know it's been met with, how do you say, negativity in the past, but I think we have a good example in how the city and another entity can work together, such as the library, that I think that could work similarly with the pool. And their programmers were not, and I think they could probably find ways to make money that we wouldn't think of. I don't know what council thinks, but I think that would be a good conversation to have.
I mean, from a staff standpoint, we'd certainly like to reach out to Mr. Eccles to say that that's something that the city council has interest in discussing with the Rec Commission board. I mean, certainly to go just look at it as an asset, we've invested quite a bit of money, both in painting and surfacing of the pool and the structures and the slides. I mean, the facility for a 12-year-old, 13-year-old facility it's in top condition, and we've even allocated some funds in next year's budget to go address some of the lifeguard stands and things that were just kind of the lower hanging fruit. So certainly the facility itself is in top-notch condition, including the water treatment components. If it's, I appreciate you bringing it up, Mayor, and if the council agrees, we'd certainly like to bridge that discussion with Rec Commission.
What do you folks say?
Well, David, I think that, I don't think it's a bad idea to look at it. I think we need to really think through the financial piece of it. Yeah, obviously, it's not a moneymaker. It never has been from the
Right.
day it opened till today. And we just have to make sure, I think it would be our job to make sure it doesn't become a bigger loss leader
Agreed.
than it already is, but I think we could work through that. And if they can create more revenue, because they would want to make some money from, I would
Sure.
expect. But if we could work through a plan to where we all win, including the taxpayers, that'd be a good deal.
What did the pool manager have any thoughts about next year and the outlook? I know we've talked about Lansing's pool is going to open up. Do we think what's the environment? Does he have any thoughts on what the environment's going to look like in the next few years?
I discussed that with him at the end of this season, and he was less concerned, Darren was less concerned with the impact of Lansing's new facility, both on a threat to our employment, which some years is difficult to secure enough seasonal, mostly high school or college age students to work at our facility. But he thought generally local or I call them kids, people who work at the pool typically live in this community or they live just outside of city limits within 10 or 15-minute drive. We've had more interest from Baser residents in recent years in working at our facility. But in terms of his visitorship, Darren actually was fairly confident that we would continue to see pretty steady numbers, but maybe a slight downtick each year. Just as our facility doesn't have kind of something new and shiny, it sort of fails to, people who have been and kind of seen it, done it, may not choose to take their family there either repeatedly or take them there at all versus traveling to a new facility in another community. But there has been a lot of issues. I believe Oskaloosa is sort of the nearest community with a water park west of us, and they've had a ton of issues with their infrastructure at that water park, leaks, closures for more than half of a season, I think last year, and difficulty in staffing. And Valley Falls has also had some other issues. So I think Darren sees our customer base kind of shifting west over the last couple of years, which was kind of surprising to hear. That is, I guess, closer than driving all the way to Bonner Springs or Lansing, too.
Well, to me, that's why the membership sold being up is the one really good thing about this report, because that to me is something more sustainable, right, than a daily pass, which we're going to deal with fluctuations much more, obviously weather and the different, what's going on in other communities. So I think that we're seeing an increase the last 3 years in our memberships, and I think we should focus on that going forward as much as we can. So anyway.
This year we also, in just hearing from the public or other groups, we heard a lot more interest this year in adult programming, which is something the city had dipped our toe into years ago, but usually had pretty lukewarm participation levels. And that's something I think that makes kind of a natural connection to the Rec Commission and their efforts with the Rec Center facility to have indoor walking and sort of adult or even elderly areas of interest or amenities. And the water park right now has an adult swim hour, but it doesn't have like aerobics classes or healthy aging classes that you see in a lot of other indoor facilities in particular.
Build a dome.
Auditorium. I think also we always ask Mr. Shoup to, we have the meeting before the pool opens, and then we do a meeting with all staff at the end. And certainly we get a lot of kudos for the way the facility's run and operated. Along the way, we get suggestions, unsolicited suggestions at times for how to make improvements. And I think one that I heard this year that I've heard in prior years is maybe a certain level of frustration over how you sign up for swim lessons. You got to show up in person at a certain time, and slots fill up quickly, and it's kind of a first come, first serve. And we've asked Mr. Shoup to consider maybe some innovations there, to be a little more accommodating, and maybe that would help. It seems like those early sessions fill up quick, and then they open a second or third session, and those aren't as well attended historically. And so maybe just getting creative with things like that, and that might increase the likelihood of either family passes being purchased or just more visitors, even on a daily basis.
Okay. Anything further? Anything further?
Not on the water park. I
Okay.
appreciate everyone's discussion in that item. I'll quickly cover a little bit more of the financial report, kind of working backwards from the water park section. Page 5 of the financial report demonstrates our current pay app tracker with Caldwell tanks. Mr. Partridge brought up that contract earlier this evening in the meeting, and we have received an 11th pay app request from the contractor. It doesn't get us through this point, but actually gets us through the end of August, roughly, with the date of that pay app. We've so far assessed $116,000 in liquidated damages on that contract. That will be added to because substantial completion has not yet been documented, even if it has been reached as of possibly last Friday, based on the service condition of the tank being filled and put into service. So that's something that you'll see an update on in the next monthly financial report when we illustrate the hopefully final liquidated damage application to that 11th pay app received from Caldwell. We are currently standing at just under 90% of the contract complete through pay app 11. And as you know, we are even closer to that with some of the work that's been intensifying the last couple weeks that allowed us to put the tank into service on last Friday, to be exact. And you look at the pictures, I think in the report, they show a good view of the logo on the third picture on page 6 of the financial report. And then you can also see some perspectives of the tank relative to the rest of the industrial park in the middle picture on that page. And also in the tank looking back towards the north, towards city limits, with the middle school tower in view, and just at the horizon, the highway tower on 2440. So they're showing on the screen now, and we appreciate Brandon Harder, our building inspector, for helping take these images and document the fresh new coat of paint on the water tank. I think we are happy to have it online and adding to our preparation. The rest of the financial report, I won't go into too much detail. Sales tax was delayed again this month, so it came in on September 1st instead of the end of August, and that's something that the state continues to struggle with periodically. We've continued to convey to them at the Department of Revenue that under cash basis, we're really most concerned with it happening on January 1st or 2nd of each year. And they're aware of that, and the League of Kansas Municipalities has made a big push for smaller cities in particular that rely on that remittance to be done in a timely fashion to avoid 2 years financial statements being off, I guess you would say, the normal schedule.
Do you know how much money they're making holding their money for an extra day or a weekend?
Somebody needs to get hired there. I don't know what's going on. When we look at budget amendments, the item tonight earlier discussed about the Capital Projects Fund, including anticipated expenses this fall as we work to complete the initial phases of that 4th Street Bridge design. So the Capital Projects Fund will be seeing a budget amendment. That is a state budgeted form, so we will be required to complete notice of public hearing and complete a public hearing in order to approve that amended budget. So be on the lookout for that. I also wanted to point out we've spent this year about $55,000 so far on the wastewater treatment plant design efforts with ARPA funds. And so we still maintain a little more than $710,000. But as the design intensifies with our application for financing and preparation of bid documents, we do expect to see that decrease significantly by the end of this fiscal year. We also this month in August completed all of our debt service payments expected for the rest of the year. Those have a due date of September 1st, and those were all completed, principal and interest as required and scheduled. And we are working out one small issue with the bank about an interest day calculation basis, and we hope to have that resolved, if not this week, at least very soon, so everything is completed and deemed satisfactory. I don't have any more highlights from the financial report other than to share that we're starting to work on the 2024 budget book, and we'll keep you apprised as that reaches completion and is published and shared. And obviously 4th Street Bridge and the sewer plant improvements will take a high position in those communications, but as well as the rest of our initiatives funded in the budget. But happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Porter. Any questions?
Thank you.
All right. Onward to city attorney agenda. All right, thank you. Ms. Stevens isn't here. City council agenda.
Just a comment that Tongi Days was awesome.
Heard many good things about it.
It was
well
really
attended?
awesome.
$17, had to buy something.
Memories that'll last a lifetime. though.
That's cool. That's cool. All right, mayor agenda. We had the library run on Saturday, and we had a small but hearty crowd. Runners are happy people, and it's always fun to be around them. So we'll regroup and see if we need to move it back to June or keep it in September. But all in all, it was a good event. Which brings
Mayor.
us to item 6, which and Mr. Dale.
Oh, Mayor, I was going to ask you real quick, just on the library run, do you know approximately the age span of like youngest participant to oldest participant?
I think my dad was 80. He's the oldest, and I don't know the youngest, but there was a young medalist under 19.
Okay, great. Well, I thought the 80-year-old was kind of cool.
Yeah, that was. I'm proud of my old man.
Yeah.
Mr. Dale.
Yes, while I'm here, I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? See you in a couple weeks.